The Straits of Salamis are narrow enough that the sea seems to press inward from both sides. A tightening corridor of dark water and echoing cliffs. You stand on a wooden deck slick with spray, the air sharp with pine resin and sweat, and the horizon is filled not with open sea, but with enemy hulls crowding closer. The oars around you rise and fall like insect legs, timed to a shouted rhythm you barely understand. If you were here in 480 BCE, you probably wouldn't survive, not because you lack courage, but because survival depends on precision learned through years of brutal training. This moment is the prelude to the Battle of Salamis, one of the most analyzed naval engagements in classical history. Officially recorded by Herodotus and later dissected by generations of scholars, it represents the moment when naval warfare became less about numbers and more about systems. The Greek fleet, dominated by Athenian triremes, functioned as a disciplined machine designed for confined waters. Each ship was a weapon platform, optimized for acceleration, turning, and coordinated strikes. In contrast, the Persian fleet, vast, multinational, and confident, relied on numerical superiority and individual bravery. The strategic dilemma was clear. The Persians wanted open water where their numbers could envelop the Greeks. The Greeks needed restriction, compression, and confusion. This wasn't just a clash of fleets, it was a clash of doctrines. Academic debate still circles whether geography alone won the battle, or whether Greek formation discipline would have triumphed even elsewhere. The strengths of the Greek system lay in cohesion and command clarity. Its weakness was fragility. Triremes were lightly built and unforgiving of mistakes. Rowers needed extraordinary endurance, precise timing, and the ability to respond instantly to shouted commands while blind to the wider battle. A strange but telling side fact: many Athenian rowers were poor citizens, whose political power at home rose directly from their naval importance, an early link between warfare and democracy. Compared to the heavy, boarding-focused ships of Phoenician or later Roman fleets, the Greek trireme at Salamis was a scalpel, not a hammer. And in these suffocating waters, scalpels mattered more. The Athenian trireme was not merely a ship. It was an engineered system tuned for a very specific kind of battle. Long, narrow, and deceptively fragile, it carried roughly 170 rowers stacked in 3 tiers, each man responsible for a single oar and a single mistake that could doom the vessel. In battle, the fleet functioned through tight formations, often a loose line abreast that could flex and pivot, allowing ships to accelerate, withdraw, and strike again. This system, officially documented in classical sources like Thucydides' later naval descriptions, reveals how the Greeks thought about war as choreography rather than chaos. To make this work, the trireme required skills few other ancient armies demanded. Rowers needed explosive power for sudden bursts of speed, fine rhythm to avoid fouling oars, and discipline to obey commands without seeing the enemy. The helmsman and trierarch coordinated steering and timing, while the kelliast shouted cadence and encouragement. Strength was essential, but endurance and coordination mattered more. One weakness of this system was exhaustion. A poorly timed maneuver could leave a ship dead in the water. The Greeks trained for this kind of combat in ways the Persians largely did not. Athenian crews practiced formation turns and rapid acceleration, preparing for maneuvers like the Deekplis, where a ship pierced an enemy line before wheeling to strike from behind. Scholars still debate how often such textbook maneuvers were executed at Salamis, but most agree the underlying training gave Greeks a decisive edge. A lesser-known detail is that triremes were often hauled ashore each night, meaning crews were intimately familiar with their ship's weight and balance. Compared to the Persian fleet composed of Phoenician, Egyptian, and Ionian vessels with varying doctrines, the Athenian system was standardized and centralized. Academic debate continues over whether this standardization or superior leadership mattered more against heavier, slower ships designed for boarding. The trireme's strength was speed and precision. Its weakness was that a single collision at the wrong angle could shatter its hull. At Salamis, that risk was accepted because control of formation turned fragility into dominance. Across the straits, the Persian fleet gathered with the confidence of an empire that had already subdued half the known world. Officially described by Herodotus as numbering in the hundreds, It was a multinational force, Phoenician triremes, Egyptian heavy ships, Ionian Greeks compelled to fight their kin. On paper, this diversity was a strength. In practice, it was a weakness the confined waters of Salamis would expose. The Persian navy functioned less as a single organism and more as a coalition. Impressive in mass but uneven in coordination, Persian commanders expected numerical superiority to decide the battle. Their doctrine favored aggressive advance and boarding actions, relying on marines rather than precision ramming. This worked well in open seas, where formations could spread and envelop. In the straits, however, that strength became a liability. Ships crowded together, oars tangled, and forward momentum stalled. Academic debate still questions whether Xerxes' admirals fully understood trireme on trireme maneuver warfare, or whether they underestimated Greek training, the skills required of Persian sailors differed sharply from those of the Athenians. Many crews were excellent seamen, but less practiced in complex formation drills. Marines, often elite troops, were expected to decide fights once ships met. This emphasis created a weakness. When ramming and maneuver disrupted boarding attempts, those soldiers became passengers rather than assets. A strange side fact emerges from ancient sources. Xerxes allegedly positioned himself on a throne, overlooking the battle, expecting a spectacle of victory. Whether literal or symbolic, the image highlights a cultural contrast between imperial confidence and Greek desperation. Compared to the tightly drilled Greek fleet, the Persians resembled later medieval naval forces that prized numbers and shock over finesse. Some historians argue that better command control could have saved them even in the straits. Others contend the geography made defeat inevitable. What is clear is that Persian strength scale could not compensate for the loss of space. At Salamis, confidence pressed forward into a narrowing trap, and the fleet's very size began to work against itself. Dawn broke with deceptive calm as the first officially recorded movements of the battle unfolded. Greek ships appeared hesitant, even disorderly, backing water as if unsure whether to fight or flee. This was no accident. According to ancient accounts, the Greeks deliberately delayed and drew the Persians forward, allowing the straits to do their work. The fleet functioned as a living formation, elastic rather than rigid, inviting pursuit and compressing the enemy line into an ever-tightening mass. Once the Persians committed, the trap closed. Their leading ships surged ahead, only to find no room to maneuver. Greek triremes pivoted inward, striking at exposed flanks. This was not a single dramatic maneuver, but a cascading series of small, controlled actions, each ship responding to shouted commands and visual cues. The officially recognized event here is the moment Persian numerical superiority collapsed into local inferiority. As only a fraction of their ships could engage at once, the strength of the Greek approach lay in adaptability. Triremes could reverse, turn sharply, and accelerate in confined space. The weakness was risk. Misjudging distance or timing could cripple a friendly vessel. Crews needed extraordinary situational awareness, trusting the formation even when individual danger loomed. This demanded mental discipline as much as physical strength. A lesser-known detail from the sources is that wind and morning currents may have favored the Greeks, further complicating Persian control. Scholars still debate how decisive environmental factors were versus deliberate tactics, but most agree the Greeks exploited every advantage available. Compared to earlier naval battles that devolved into boarding melees, Salamis marked a shift toward formation warfare at sea. The Persians, trained for momentum and mass, found themselves stalled and turning blind. The Greeks, fighting in familiar waters, transformed hesitation into weaponized deception. As hulls pressed together and oars shattered, the trap was no longer theoretical, it was closing, ship by ship. At close quarters, trireme combat became a test of mechanics, training, and nerve. The Greek ships did not simply crash forward, they aimed with intent. The bronze-sheathed ram at the prow was designed to strike below the enemy's oar line, splintering hull planks and snapping oars in a single, controlled impact. When executed correctly, the attacking trireme would immediately back water or sheer away, avoiding entanglement. This officially recognized style of fighting distinguished Salamis from later naval battles. Dominated by boarding. The formation only worked because of crew coordination. Rowers had to deliver sudden bursts of speed on command, then stop instantly to prevent fouling oars. Helmsmen judged angles by instinct, while deck officers shouted corrections over the noise. The strength of the Greek system was repetition. These actions were drilled relentlessly. Its weakness was fatigue. As the battle dragged on, timing became harder to maintain. Persian bravery was not lacking. Ancient sources note repeated attempts to close and board, but disordered approaches made Marines ineffective. A lesser-known detail is that many Persian ships, once damaged, drifted into their own following lines, causing collisions and panic. This cascading failure magnified Greek success. Beyond the initial strikes, academic debate continues over how often textbook maneuvers like the Deekplis were used in the chaos. Some historians argue the battle was messier than later idealized accounts suggest. Others counter that even imperfect execution favored the Greeks, because their entire system prioritized recovery and reformation, compared to later Roman quinquiremes built to absorb punishment and fight as floating fortresses. The Trireme at Salamis was unforgiving. It demanded skill over mass. Greek sailors needed precision, endurance, and trust in formation, while Persian crews relied on courage and numbers. As ships lost oars and mobility, the Persian fleet's structure dissolved. What remained was not a line, but fragments, each one vulnerable to the next disciplined strike. By midday, the battle's outcome was no longer in doubt. The Persian fleet, once an imposing wall of hulls, had fractured into scattered groups retreating or running aground. Officially, Salamis ended as a decisive Greek victory, but its deeper significance lay in how it reshaped naval thinking. The Greek fleet did not pursue recklessly. Instead, it maintained cohesion, securing the straits and denying the Persians any chance to regroup. This restraint reflects how the fleet functioned, not as a mob of victors, but as a disciplined force, still wary of overextension. The strengths of the Greek system now became even clearer in hindsight. Their command structure allowed for controlled disengagement, preserving ships for future operations. The weakness, however, remained political and logistical. Athens could not afford heavy losses. Every trireme required massive investment in manpower and training. This made discipline after victory just as important as aggression during battle. The skills demanded of Greek sailors did not end with combat. Crews had to manage damaged ships, rescue survivors, and reform lines under stress. A lesser-known side fact is that some Persian ships, particularly Ionian Greek contingents, may have deliberately fought less aggressively, a detail that fuels ongoing academic debate about loyalty. Within Xerxes' navy, compared to other ancient navies, Salamis marked a transition point. Earlier powers relied on size and shock. Later ones, like Rome, would blend mass with organization. The Greeks demonstrated that formation discipline could overcome numerical inferiority, especially in restrictive environments. Historians still argue whether this lesson was fully understood by contemporaries or rediscovered only through later analysis. Strategically, Salamis forced Xerxes to abandon his immediate plans for total conquest, reshaping the course of the Greco-Persian Wars. The battle proved that control of the sea could decide land campaigns, a concept that would echo through naval history. In the narrowing straits, Greek triremes did more than win a battle. They defined a doctrine. The Battle of Salamis endures because it represents more than a dramatic upset. It is a case study in how systems outperform raw power. The Greek trireme fleet succeeded not through individual heroics, but through a tightly integrated combination of ship design, crew training, command discipline, and environmental awareness. In effectiveness terms, Salamis demonstrates that naval warfare had reached a level of sophistication comparable to land-based formation fighting, where cohesion and timing mattered more than personal valor. The Greek approach proved exceptionally effective in confined waters. Its strengths, maneuverability, rapid acceleration, and formation control neutralized Persian advantages in numbers and marine strength. Yet it was not universally dominant. In open seas, the same light construction and reliance on precision could become liabilities. This nuance is central to modern academic debate. Salamis was not proof that triremes always beat larger fleets, but that the right doctrine in the right environment can be decisive. Equally important is the human element. Greek sailors required rare skills, endurance, rhythmic coordination, and obedience under extreme pressure. These demands created a professionalized naval culture that set Athens apart from many contemporaries. The Persian fleet, though brave and capable, lacked unified doctrine and suffered from overconfidence and constrained command control. In comparative terms, Salamis foreshadowed later naval revolutions, from Roman adaptations to early modern line tactics. Its effectiveness lay in showing that the sea, like land, could be shaped by formations and strategy. In those narrow straits, Greek triremes turned geography into a weapon and proved that survival in ancient warfare belonged to those who mastered systems, not just strength.